For 4 months in 1966, Richmond, Virginia played host to a series of weird UFO events. It began on the night of June 24, 1966, 3:30 a.m. Officer William L. Stevens Jr. was patrolling the northeastern section of the city in car 265, going north on Meadow Bridge Road, near the city limits. About 4 blocks ahead was the Atlantic Rural Exposition Grounds, site of the annual state fair. Focusing his attention in that direction, Stevens noticed some odd, greenish-yellow lights in the air. He assumed that he was looking at a reflection of some sort, so he leaned out the window and confirmed the sighting was real. There was definitely something up there in the sky. Stevens decided he was going to investigate. He radioed the dispatcher about his activities and then proceeded across the city line in the direction of where the object was hovering. As he moved towards it, Stevens began to make out that a dirigible-like object with a row of green and yellow lights around its perimeter was hovering above the Richmond-Henrico Turnpike. Surrounding the object was a mist or a vapor. It seemed to be about 100 to 125 feet long and 30 to 40 feet high, but no structural details were visible, only a sharp outline against the dark sky. The object filled a large part of his windshield, appearing as wide as the steering wheel. Flipping on his emergency lights, Officer Stevens suddenly accelerated towards the object. The object reacted almost immediately, turning laterally at about 90 degrees and moving swiftly above the turnpike away from him. As it did this, Stevens could make out a circular outline. Stevens continued to speed up in an effort to catch the object, but it maintained its distance. "The object seemed to be playing tag with me," Stevens said. The chase continued across Henrico County and into Hanover County, with the officer pushing his speed to over 100 miles an hour. After 10 to 15 minutes of this cat-and-mouse play, the object suddenly accelerated and disappeared into the night in a matter of seconds. Officer Stevens had radio for assistance during the pursuit, but before other police cars could arrive, the UFO was gone. "If I live to be 100, I'll never forget it," Stevens said in a July 21, 1966 edition of the Richmond News Leader. Interestingly, 6 days after Stevens' UFO chase story appeared in the newspaper, the morning of July 27, 2 people in Richmond watched as a UFO hovered over them for over 2 minutes before taking off. The strangest and most frightening UFO sighting that year in Richmond happened less than 2 weeks after the couple's July 27th sighting. This happened on August 9, 1966, and involved a road sergeant with the Henrico Police named Toby Matthews. Mark Bowes of the Richmond Times-Dispatch spoke to Matthews, then 65, about the 1966 encounter, which was published in an October 1999 issue of the Times-Dispatch. Matthews, a 2-time sheriff, was, at the time, running for the Varina district seat on the Henrico Board of Supervisors. Apparently it had leaked that 3 years earlier, Matthews mentioned the encounter to his former chief deputy during a Christmas dinner in Williamsburg. Matthews had never publicly disclosed the incident for fear that no one would believe him, that is, until Bowes asked. Rather than shy away from the question, Matthews decided to open up about what he saw on the night of August 9, 1966. Matthews told Bowes that he had just returned home from a psychology class at the former Richmond Professional Institute, now Virginia Commonwealth University. He was a road sergeant with the Henrico Police and was living alone at the time at his farm on Charles City Road in the county's Glendale area. At about 10:30 that evening, Matthews said that his German Shepherd, tied to a chain out back, began barking loudly, so he went out to investigate. After turning him loose, Matthews said the dog, which he had only acquired 3 weeks earlier, ran to the edge of the adjacent cornfield. He was astonished at what he saw next. "I happened to look up and there was that UFO right above the cornfield. It was just hovering right above the power lines about 200 feet in the air. The craft, which Matthews described as white and about 30 feet in diameter, made hardly a sound and emitted no light. The saucer-shaped object was about 4 or 5 feet wide at its widest point, which was in the middle. It was just like the ones you see on TV," Matthews said. "It was a bright moon that night, so I got a good look at it." Matthews said he ran back inside his house to get his flashlight. When he returned and shined it on the craft, the UFO turned slightly, emitted a burst of light, and took off like a bullet, just tremendously fast. Matthews said he rechained the dog and went to bed after the craft disappeared. He got up about 5 in the morning and went out to check his dog. He let it run loose for a few minutes, as was his routine, but the dog didn't come back. Matthews said he canvassed the area, but the dog was nowhere to be found. When he returned home, he was startled to find his dog lying motionless in the middle of the road, just beyond his circular driveway. The dog was dead. He didn't have a mark on him. No blood, no singe marks, no nothing, Matthews recalled. It looked like he almost was sleeping, and whatever killed him, they had taken his chain collar off and dropped it on the shoulder of the road. I couldn't believe how it got off him like it did. Matthews said his neighborhood in those days was remote and largely devoid of traffic at that hour. I didn't see any cars come through at the time, Matthews said. He assumed that his dog was killed by whoever or whatever was in the UFO. The dog let me know that they were there. The dog's death remained a mystery. He buried the shepherd that morning in a meadow on his property. Matthews said that the city officer who saw a UFO near the state fairgrounds a month earlier, Officer Stevens, had urged him to notify the news media about his encounter, but Matthews resisted. Matthews was living alone at the time, and there were no other witnesses, so he doubted anyone would believe him. I wasn't frightened by it. It was kind of awesome, Matthews said of the object. Of course, back in those days, I was still in the military reserve, and it didn't appear to be any type of military craft at all, because number one, it wouldn't have done what it did had it been a known military aircraft. December 1996, Matthews told his story to then Chief Deputy Patrick Haley and his wife Brenda during a Christmas dinner party at the Seafarers restaurant in Williamsburg. The way he told it was so specific, and he was dead serious. He wasn't joking. We talked about this for months, said Haley, who became the Deputy Coordinator of Law Enforcement Accreditation for the Virginia Department of Criminal Justice Services. Haley, who resigned abruptly after about a year as the deputy's number 2 officer because he believed incompetent leadership and dishonorable management practices by Matthews, created a host of problems with the sheriff's office, recalled Matthews telling him a slightly different version of the encounter. Haley said he remembered Matthews saying the craft had landed in the cornfield and it had emitted some kind of strong pull that drew him toward it, although he managed to resist it. Haley also recalled Matthews saying that his dog, after it was found dead, appeared to have been burnt or singed, something Matthews denied. Those things didn't happen, Matthews told Bose. Haley's details aside, Matthews sticks by his story. I really saw the thing, I really did, and I've never seen anything like that since then. Bose noted in his news story that he managed to track down other sightings in 1966, news accounts that appeared in the Times-Dispatch and the Richmond News Leader, documenting the fact that more than a half a dozen people, including 3 other Richmond area police officers, had reported spotting similar objects hovering over the city, Henrico, and Goochland County. The 1966 sightings in Richmond, Virginia, even made it into Project Blue Book. On September 24, 1966, a meteor-like object with nocturnal lights was observed. Of course, they elected to explain it away as a meteor. So what was going on between June and September 1966 in Richmond, Virginia? Was it some kind of government experiment? Were a bunch of people, including police officers, just hallucinating? Or had visitors from some other time or place arrived briefly for some reason we have yet to understand?